Rock of Ages, let our song praise your saving power. Thou amidst the raging foes, you were our sheltering tower.
Underpants Gnomes. Now, those of you that are in the know are laughing or very confused. Those of you who are not in the know are just very confused or have already turned off this, so sorry about that. Anyway, wisdom comes from just about anywhere, and in an early season of South Park, there was an episode called Underpants Gnomes, which involved gnomes, like garden gnomes, who went into the drawers of the boys and stole their underpants, and when the mystery was attempted to be solved by the boys, the answer that was given was the purpose of stealing the underpants was to make big money. After, of course, this was more thoroughly examined, the scene went something like this. Step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, Step 3, big money. And then, of course, when one of the workers had to call a supervisor, all right, supervisor, what's step 2? Well, step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, step 3, big money. So, happy Chanukah, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom, and what in the world does this have to do with Chanukah or Shabbat or Parashat Miketz or anything? And that is, well, we are in the middle of Chanukah, and we are in Parashat Miketz, which is the second part of the Joseph story, and I've been teaching for years, and I'm certainly not alone. It is one of the great themes of Chanukah, that this is a holiday where we celebrate overcoming. And I'm not going to go into the history of Hanukkah or the various, there's a billion videos out there talking about the different ideas behind Hanukkah and the different histories and the different stories and why they existed and the politics behind it. That's not for this particular sermon. But I'm including this video not only as a sermon, but also as part of my iterative process series, which means that each holiday that we encounter, there should be a series of questions that we ask, and we can look back at the questions over the course of years and see that our answers are progressing, that they're changing, that we're dealing with different things. And generally speaking, when we're dealing with Hanukkah, the question is, what are we in the process of overcoming? The story of Hanukkah is, among other things, a story of overcoming, regardless of which version of the Hanukkah story we want to look at. The oldest version, the Festival of Lights version that goes back into pre-Judaism, prehistory, is in the darkest time of the year. We try to bring about light. That's anthropologically true in just about every culture. The next level upon that is overcoming or vanquishing the remnants of Alexander the Great's army. A pretty impressive feat, I think anyone would say. And of course, when that became politically very incorrect for a variety of reasons, then the story became the stocks, overcoming the lack of stock, the miracle of the oil, that there wasn't enough oil for the 8-day rededication of a temple, so somehow through the miracle of the Hanukkah krug of oil, that it lasted 8 days. Either way, these are all stories of overcoming, and the reason that the Parashat Vayeshev and Miketz, the Joseph story, is in the middle of all this is, well, isn't that as much of a story of overcoming as anything? Here's a very callow young man who, when he appears on the scenes, is, well, he's callow, and his brothers massively overreact, and over the process he's nearly killed and he's beaten and he's sold to slavers, I pointed out last week, and ends up in Egypt, and this is all from Vayeshev, and he ends up in the household of an important Egyptian where he again rises, so there's some level of overcoming right there. He finds a place in life, and then through a false accusation he ends up in prison, which I can only imagine that was a relatively unpleasant experience. And then he continues using his gifts, and eventually, after he should have years before been brought out of prison, Pharaoh finally hears of this Hebrew who happens to have dream interpretation ability, and that's step 1, overcoming. Step 3, fame, fortune, and success, right? And happiness, because the end of the story is Joseph and his brothers and dancing kumbaya, and everyone has enough food, and Joseph is the second most powerful person in Egypt, except for that's not really the story, is it? And I think that within Parashat Miketz, we skip over step 2, hence the Underpants Gnomes. And step 2 is what happens in between becoming favored of Pharaoh and the happily ever after, which isn't quite as clear and Hollywood Disney as that. Which, if anyone wants to argue that that's the meaning of the Joseph story, is to have a happily ever after, then just let me know and we'll have that argument and we can do it on a podcast together. But the point that I'm trying to make here is there's a story in between which is central to Miketz. If we're reading the triennial cycle, it is what we're reading, and it is the strangeness that happens, the games that Joseph is playing when his brothers, there's a famine in Canaan, and so his brothers or some of his brothers come and attempt to request aid of the Egyptians. And, once Joseph realized that he's not being recognized, he begins a series of games, some of them very personal and dangerous. His younger brother Benjamin's not there, and he forces the brothers to go get them. He hides money in their sacks. I can only imagine that, if that had gone differently, then all the brothers would be dead. And as you look through the various different commentators, it's explained away. It's explained away as Joseph needed to know if he could trust his brothers. And I get all that. I completely get all that. But this middle part of the story, this step 2 in between steel underpants and big money, I think needs to be looked at a little bit more honestly. And I'm saying honestly because let's call Joseph's actions exactly what they were. There was at least a little bit of schadenfreude. There was a little bit of getting revenge. And I'm not even purely calling this out, because if I were in Joseph's place, I can't imagine that I would act any more ethically elevated than what he did. I mean, the larger story is his family is going to die from starvation. His beef is against his brothers, not necessarily his father, not necessarily the rest of the household, depending on which midrash you read, all of his sisters. And so Joseph's game playing has potential consequences, and it needs to be looked at for what it actually is. Now, I think one of the ways to look at this is to take a huge step back and just look at the process of individuation itself, or if you want, we can call it the beginning of the spiritual journey. I think that they're pretty much the same thing with different vocabularies depending on what tribe we are calling our home tribe. As we are born, we don't have agency. Hopefully that's not news to anyone, but it's bigger than that because we're born into a tribe, and I've got a whole bunch of videos recently on tribes and podcasts talking about it. But when we are born into our tribe, the purpose of the tribe is to keep us safe and secure. That is through all of human evolution. This is something that in the 21st century, where we have a general Western liberalism that allows us to ask questions and become self-realized if we choose to take that journey, that is always going to butt heads with the tribe, because safety and security does not go very well with personal expression and freedom. It's not how evolution works. That's not how tribes work. And so as more and more of us are going through this process of self-actualization and individuation, or individual spiritual journey, almost everyone has gone through at some level that point of having to break apart from the tribe. If you've gone on this journey of individuality, you have to break apart from the tribe. If you've never done that, then your journey is not individuality. It's being a part of the tribe, which is fine. But let's look at and be honest at what happens when we do begin that journey of individuation. Not only are we rejected or pushed out or warned by the tribe, sanctioned by the tribe, something has to happen to try to bring us back in. And if we won't come back in, then to not damage the tribe. However it is we're defining tribe, religion or family of birth, or again, go back and watch those videos. But we also reject the tribe, oftentimes profoundly, doing the exact opposite. It's one of the reasons that when someone comes up and says, "Do you believe in God?" I refuse to answer that, because they'd better first define believe and then God. But many people who from the other direction come up and say, "I'm an atheist, I dare you to talk to me about that," then the first thing I'm going to say is, fine, tell me first which God you're rejecting. And when we're going through the process of breaking away, and when it's happened via oftentimes trauma and drama and great emotions, we are going to take the exact opposite direction, but we're also going to do exactly what the tribe would not have us do. All of us have a sort of born-again experience when we step into that, and that born-again experience becomes very self-centered. Sometimes even very, very selfish. And again, I'm not saying that this is wrong. It's universal. It's going to happen. If you've gone through a process of individuation, take that second and take that deep breath and watch how you did it. It is absolutely there. But from a general standpoint, this self-centered, and I know that even that is going to cause emotions to use those words, but it really, really is. Let's say I was born into a household that, shoved meat down my face and I've become a vegan. One of the ways that I'm going to experience the process of individuation is by taking radical control over what goes into my body. And if I do that, then it's going to be all about what goes into my body. And I'm going to be the biggest pain in the butt at any party I'm invited to, because at this stage of my development, it's not only going to be about saying what I need, it's going to be demanding that anyone else in my new tribe, that I'm not calling a tribe, but it's my new tribe, is going to respect my agency and my individuality. And so I'm going to test that. And again, most of this happens at an unconscious level, but I'm going to test that by saying, if I come to your house, then you're going to have X, Y, and Ypsilon and Z and whatever in order to be able to make sure that I'm there. And we become very conscious of our own needs. And that's step 2. It's the games we play. And again, I'm not trying to say, oh, woe is anyone who has done this and is in it. This is what has to happen. The work of individuation begins with breaking away. And the act of breaking away has an incredibly predictable trajectory. So back to Joseph and back to Chanukah and back to that process by which we ask questions each year. The easiest question to ask is, what traumas have I experienced? Most of us are getting really good at listing them. Chanukah comes in and we add to that, what work am I doing to overcome that? But that's not where it ends, because the next series of questions are, in the process of overcoming my traumas, what demands am I making of those around me? In other words, am I conscious of the glass that I'm knocking over as I walk into my room of individuation? It's going to happen. And if it's going to happen, then are we conscious of the relationships we're damaging in that process? Step 3, maybe it's not success and happiness. It's probably more something to the effect of, after I've gone through that process, becoming conscious again of my place in tribe or chosen tribe. My place in community, whether I've gone back to my community of birth or whether I have developed or become part of a different community. Am I conscious not only of what I need to get out of that community, but what I need to give to that community? Overcoming only as a self-centered process leads to me being a burden on the community, which, guess what? Eventually that community is going to say, no, we've had enough of you, and that's going to lead to another trauma where we feel like we've been rejected by yet another tribe, and that pattern will keep on repeating ourselves until we make it to step 3. And I was mocking before the idea that the end of the Joseph story was happiness, success, and fame and fortune. And of course, what are the first words that we read in the post-Joseph story, the post-generations? And there was one day where a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. His story is part of a continuum, just like our life is not only a single trauma. It is going through this process. Every time we are hurt, we have to overcome, but the process of overcoming will always lead us to complicated behaviors, playing games, demanding of others. And unless we recognize, 1, that it's a necessary process, but 2, it's a process that leads us to something else, a balance between what I need and what I can do for the community, then we haven't overcome anything at all. Remember, the beginning of the Joseph story was completely horrible overreaction, didn't need to happen, and as awful as what happened to it was, there's a tiny piece that Joseph plays in it due to a young son lording over the older sons. The reaction is not appropriate, it's not justified, there's no victim blaming going on here, but it's recognition that we're in dialogue with life around us. And at some point, part of our reckoning is asking, what am I putting into the world right now? As I'm overcoming my own pain, am I hurting anyone else in the process? So the iterative process of Chanukah is asking those questions and then being really honest with the answers. What am I in the process of overcoming? Recognizing it. If the answer is nothing, then that's one of the reasons we need Chanukah, is that constant reminding of how difficult life can be, but that we can overcome. And I would say that if we don't believe we're overcoming anything, then we're in a serious situation. So the first question, what are we overcoming? Recognizing it, calling it out. And then the second part of that is recognizing what we're doing that is helpful and harmful to ourselves, to others in that process of overcoming, recognizing how complicated that is, and that we're doing this one way or another as part of a community. Almost none of us exists alone, as much as we would like to believe that, and our nature of communities has changed. But the deepest truth is the oldest truth, which doesn't feel right sometimes in 2021, which is why maybe sometimes we have to look back to the oldest archetypal truth, and that is Chanukah, as a festival of lights, lights the 8th candle in the most darkness. It's not on the solstice, it's the new moon closest to the winter solstice. It's the time that there is the least amount of light in the world is when we provide the most. We provide the most for our own needs, but also for those of others. And that yin and yang, that partnership that we have between our individual needs and our community needs is, I think, the hidden message in the Miketz Joseph story. And certainly, there's nothing in Chanukah that can really take place without a whole bunch of people working together to overcome. So with that one, let's ask the questions. And when we come back again next year, let's look back and see how far we've come. That's really what Judaism is about. It's why it's relevant. Let's be relevant together in our tradition. Shabbat Shalom. Chanukah Sameach.
Furiously they assailed us, but thine arm availed us, and thy word broke their sword when our own strength failed us, and your word broke their sword when our own strength failed us, our own strength failed us.